Thriller Bark in its entirety has always felt kind of off to me. Way too big, way too mysterious, and packed with way too many secrets for a guy like Moria to just casually be floating around in, if you get my drift. But now that we finally know so much more about God Valley, and also Rocksteady Xebec finally having taken the stage in One Piece, everything starts to click into place for me. Because I don't think that Thriller Bark is just a big weird ship. I think that the old One Piece theory might be true, that it's literally the remains of God Valley, and if that were to be true, then we're not just talking about a creepy weird island, we're talking about the return of a legendary battlefield, and maybe even the return of a lurking legend that didn't actually die on that fateful day 38 years ago and has just returned in the story. I've been very excited for this one, especially with the recent Rocks reveal, and as always, put on your theory hat, check out your disbelief at the door, let's have some fun here, and then we can always be critical afterwards. And the first big connection that I want to get into that makes me believe that Thriller Bark is God Valley are, of course, the characters. Now, back during the Thriller Bark arc, we learned that Moria stole these corpses from all over the One Piece world, including some seriously strong ones. But what we didn't know at the time is that these guys in this panel are basically all confirmed to be former Rocks pirates. I mean, let's just take a look at all the crazy connections a lot of other smart heads in the One Piece community have made over the years, from when the Rocks pirates showed up on God Valley right here, where we've got Silver X, the heavy drinker Captain John, this dude here with the claws that kind of look like Blackbeards by the way, who was also part of Rox's crew, as was this big heavy armored dude. Love all their designs by the way. Now, Oda even revealed a new former member of the Rocks pirates in a recent SBS question corner in the latest volume, where it's right here, this dude here. That man's name is Gil Baster, and he was the 4 armored gun-wielding zombie, in better resolution right here, and Moria somehow had all of these Rocks pirates in his collection. So I'm willing to bet that pretty much all of these guys in this entire spread that we get here were Rocks pirates who got defeated back during the legendary battle on God Valley. I'm especially intrigued, by the way, by the guy with like the weird, thing and the long, I don't know, that guy just looks cool. Now, sure, Moria collecting famous corpses isn't exactly big news in the year 2025. I mean, that's kind of his whole thing, right? But here's where it starts to get really strange. All of these bodies were gathered in Thriller Bark, which kind of raises the question, why would the bodies of Rocks pirates, out of all people, who all supposedly died at God Valley, end up on this random spooky island that just so happens to be the biggest ship in the world? It's almost like, I don't know, Moria didn't collect all these corpses, but instead found them all in one place. One insane old battlefield full of the bodies of strong fighters and dead legends. What I'm saying is that he found God Valley and then decided to turn a chunk of it into a big ship. Now, even though we've learned a lot recently, God Valley overall is still a big mystery. We do know the Celestial Dragons were there, along with some of their slaves and the native people of the island. We do know that it was the location of this totally screwed up slave hunt, really gruesome stuff, one of Oda's wildest things, by the way, that he's done for a villain group, and we do know that it disappeared from the map after the Rocks God Valley incident, which I think a lot of people just assumed might have been Imu, who, has now a track record of, vanishing islands of the map. But if you compare the structure of Thriller Bark, the castle, the towers, the gates, the size, and the way it feels like it was carved out of something ancient, just saying. And let's be real here for a second, Moria isn't hauling all that architecture around because he's so much into the spooky vibes, right? Something about that place meant enough to him to fully preserve it and take it with him and do like a whole construction project on it. Also, turns out that both Thriller Bark and God Valley are from the West Blue. That is very important because Moria originally comes from the West Blue, and we do know that at some point he did cross into the Grand Line, but instead of setting up shop on a regular island, he built or found Thriller Bark, which I think is all that's left of the erased God Valley, which actually just fits perfectly thematically because of course the guy with the corpse army is living on a ghost of an island as well. That kind of tracks. Moria, who was a proud pirate but then was beat down and became a shell of his former self, and God Valley, which was beaten down by the world government and later turned into a shell of its former self, all kind of nicely lines up just storytelling wise in my eyes. But this is only step number one. The characters, the bodies, the locations, and the origin in the West Blue all pointing toward one conclusion, that Thriller Bark isn't just Moria's creepypasta base, it is the last remains left of God Valley, hiding in very much plain sight. And again, all we've talked about so far isn't like anything crazy new. Fans have speculated this for quite a while now, but with everything that we've recently learned and everything I'm gonna put together in this video for you here and add on top of this stuff, well, then we're gonna start to see some crazy patterns. As you'll watch this video, you'll hopefully start to agree with me that it's very likely that Rox D. Xebec might not actually be as dead as everyone thinks he is. Now, going back to the Thriller Bark being God Valley thing, if that were to be true, let's take it for true here, we would need to ask the big elephant question in the room. Why in the world did Moria even steal God Valley to begin with? Because that's a crazy project to even pull off. And so after spending some more time digging into the timeline of Moria's life and the whole God Valley incident and what happened around it, things then really started coming into place, and I kind of felt like I was onto something here. So here's what we know. Moria was defeated by Kaido 23 years ago before the current storyline, and that moment completely broke his character. He basically went from a confident rookie pirate who was fairly strong, had his own crew, who wanted to find the One Piece, to a guy who completely changed his entire strategy, personality, and vibes overall. Because after that crushing loss, he ditched the idea of relying on living crewmates, and pivoted hard into building a completely zombie army. And that's the point where the concept of Thriller Bark really started to take shape. And here's the part that gets me riled up and that really kicks things off for us, because Kaido, of course, used to be part of the Rocks Pirates. So Moria lost to Kaido in a very intense battle on Wano that cost the lives of apparently his entire crew, and then suddenly decides to start collecting corpses of the single strongest pirate crew in history, including members of Kaido's old crew. Now, knowing Oda, I would just like to throw the idea out there that that might not be coincidence. For me, that sounds very much like revenge prep. Now, we don't know exactly when Moria got the Kage Kami no Mi itself, but once he had it, his abilities were absolutely perfect for something like this. Because if you want to make the ultimate undead army, you don't go digging around random old graveyards, you go to the battlefield where the strongest of the strong died, and the biggest one of those in the last few decades was, of course, God Valley. And now it gets really interesting, because if all he wanted were the bodies, why drag the entire freaking island with him at all? Like, what's the point? But let's really think about it. He didn't just snatch some corpses and then bounce. He took a huge chunk of that place, turned it into a mobile fortress, made it float, and that's just a ridiculous amount of effort just to get a few extra bodies over time, right? So why? Well, maybe the answer is that there were just so many high-level bodies, we're talking Marines, pirates, maybe even some of the Holy Knights, lying dead across the island, that it made just more sense to take the entire battlefield with him. Like, why pick and choose when you can just steal the whole buffet, right? Especially if you've got the resources and the broken spirit to justify it. But it's not just that. I think there might be something else here, something even bigger than just the powerful corpses. 'Cause I got a feeling that there might be something else that was buried on God Valley, something that the world government wanted to be gone off the records of the history books, some sort of treasure, or even an all-powerful secret devil fruit, or some forbidden history from the Void Century. Whatever it could be, it had to be worth hiding the entire island itself, because remember, the world government didn't just erase the name God Valley from the maps, they wiped it from history. But maybe it then disappeared because Moria or someone else physically moved the island, just a thought here. And also, I think it's interesting to mention the crown jewel of Hachinosu, which got stolen by the government and brought to God Valley, which was why Rox came to the place to begin with, so maybe Moria knew about that. And maybe he failed, or maybe he just never understood what he actually had his hands on with this. Either way, I do believe that he turned God Valley into his floating base and loaded it up with the bodies of, the strongest fighters he could find. And I do gotta say, honestly, stealing a legendary island full of corpses to beat your ex-rival is kind of a cool move. Unstable? Yeah, absolutely, but really cool power move. I kind of approve, actually. And Moria isn't exactly usually a great character, but if that's true, kind of based. So with that, we now have a motive. Moria loses to Kaido, Kaido wants revenge, goes after remnants of Kaido's old crew, yada yada, but he doesn't just collect the bodies, instead he turns God Valley into Thriller Bark. Now, before we go any further here, we've got to talk for a moment about one thing that keeps popping up whenever I've talked with people about this theory, because I do know that there are a lot of people thinking, Manu, wait, didn't Imu already destroy God Valley? Like, literally erase it the same way that, they wiped out Lulusia? Isn't that the implication? Which is a really fair point. I mean, we do know that God Valley was erased from maps and memory before ever something happened to poor old Lulusia, but here is the thing. Once you really start lining up the timeline, it just kind of falls apart a little bit, at least in my hands. Because when you think about it, back during the God Valley incident, Imu didn't yet have access to the Mother Flame, the power source that was only recently developed by the Vegapunks. And if they were able to use an ancient weapon back then, why not use it on Ohara as well? But they obviously didn't. They sent in a Buster Call and let it burn the old-fashioned way. No sky laser required, just old big guns. Yay. So if they didn't have the power to fully erase an island just yet at that point, then God Valley probably wasn't completely destroyed in the very same way. It was just hidden or moved until Moria then somehow got his hands on it. And look, I get it. Most of what I've said so far isn't some brand new discovery. The zombie generals and the West Blue origin, it's all kind of out there in the open, and once you start connecting it to God Valley, things do line up. But here's the part that really threw me, because the deeper I looked into Thriller Bark, the more I then realized just how many characters tied to the Rocks Pirates were cycling around this arc. And I'm not just talking about the former Rocks Pirates bodies that Moria was using for his army. This thing runs way deeper to like a scary, creepy degree. Let's strap in for this one. Let's start with the obvious one here, Kaido. Obviously a former Rocks Pirate and the one who beat down Moria and turned him into the shadowy puppet master that we then met on Thriller Bark. But what I do want to mention here is that Kaido has insanely deep ties to Wano for obvious reasons, and Moria got one and possibly even two of his strongest zombie subordinates directly from Wano. I'm of course talking about Ryuma, the legendary samurai, Zoro associate who is known as the sword god of Wano, and then there is Ors, the enormous ancient giant who we do know died in the mysterious Land of Ice, which, if you watched my last video, we think might be the Ringo region in Wano. And Kaido of course has also made his home base in the skull of the most massive ancient giant imaginable if it was a real creature, so yeah, the Kaido and Ors connections are really strong, but more on that in just a moment. Because Kaido is surprisingly not the only emperor with direct ties to Thriller Bark, because Big Mom actually surprisingly has a link here too, and it's kind of easy to overlook, but Thriller Bark is where we first meet Lola, who turns out to be Big Mom's daughter. Now in the manga it's kind of played off as a gag at first, Lola and the marriage proposal stuff, but it ends up being a pretty important detail. Lola ran away because she didn't want to marry Loki, and Big Mom was yet another core member of the Rocks Pirates. So that's another direct connection with the Empress and the Rocks Pirates, and we even get the Loki connection in the arc too. And yet there is even more, because let's look at Ors himself. Now at that time when the arc was going on, we didn't know much about where Ors came from, who he even was supposed to be, but now, with what's happening in Elbaf right now, it is really all coming together. Oh, shaking a little bit. So much fun, because we just had the big rocks reveal, and where is he? In Elbaf. And who is he chasing down? Harold, an ancient giant related character just like Ors, and suddenly that decision to bring Ors into the story back in Thriller Bark feels a lot more intentional, and yet another connection to the Rocks Pirates. And since we are kind of following the breadcrumbs here that Oda left, Thriller Bark is also where we first met Kuma, by the way. This is a guy who was literally on God Valley. His entire flashback is kind of tied to that place. He was there when it all went down and saved a ton of lives. So come on, I'm kind of running out of fingers to count the number of links between Thriller Bark and God Valley at this point, and even the side monsters kind of have been starting to look very suspicious in retrospect, especially with the current arc of Elbaf. I mean, there's a Cerberus on Thriller Bark, and now in the story we've got Shamrock, who has literal Cerberus powers, possibly from his sword or devil fruits, who we do think might have been on God Valley too with his brother Shanks, which is how they ended up being split. So weird little connection, but the kind of thing that could come back as another breadcrumb in the future. And without going into too much detail, there's a lot more of these tiny little weird foreshadowing thingies, like the tree that Luffy wanted to recruit on his crew that actually like kind of foreshadows Big Mom's homies and all that. There's a bunch. So here's kind of what it all in the end boils down to. Thriller Bark arc wasn't just a weird pit stop before Sabaody, it was a massive info dump disguised as a Halloween special. It introduced characters, themes, and corpses that are now exploding back in relevancy in the story, and all of it connects back to one man, Rox. Kaido, Big Mom, Shanks, Kuma, who then all had connections back to God Valley. Also, I just realized Moria was one of the people present at Roger's execution, who obviously has the ties there too, but anyways, to keep the cycle going, all of this connects back to you, who can learn the true secrets of the One Piece world by joining the official Patreon of this channel. Because not only do we have a bunch of custom bonus content for you there, artwork, a lot of, behind the scenes stuff, but also a really fun community and a free weekly newsletter about all the news in the One Piece world that you can get for free if you don't have the money or you just don't want to support the channel for whatever reason. If you do though, go check it out in the link in the description below, and back to the video. Alright, so by now I'm kind of hoping I've at least got you thinking a little bit about the idea that Thriller Bark and God Valley might be way more connected than we all originally thought. And so if Moria really did steal part of the island and turn it into this floating fortress, then yeah, the next thing we now gotta figure out is how in the world did this even happen? Because the place isn't exactly a pedal boat. It's the biggest ship we kind of know of right now, maybe excluding the Noah, not quite sure, and you just don't slap that together with a couple of planks and a dream and like a guy like Usa being like, give me another 50 years to put this together. No. And for the longest time, I had no answer to that. It kind of was one of these things where, in early One Piece, we all kind of felt like, oh, there are weird things in the One Piece world. There's no big meaning behind it. No. Turns out there's meaning behind everything, and Oda has explanations for all these things. And thinking about it again for this video, Moria never exactly struck me as the big shipbuilding type of person until I read chapter 1154. Now, that was the moment it really kind of snapped into place, and I really decided to focus on this theory for this video. Because you see, in chapter 1154, we were told about this legendary group of giant shipbuilders called the Galela, a group that included ancient giants, and that this group got then captured by someone, maybe the world government, maybe by someone else, and then completely frozen solid. And when I heard about all that, I was like, alright, bam, giant shipbuilders, frozen, and I know we have all the frozen giants on Punk Hazard, but also, Ors, who was frozen solid until Moria dug him out somehow in the land of ice. Again, tying back to the last video. And so at this point, my brain is just completely buzzing, right? Because imagine this. Moria finds the remains of this ancient shipbuilding crew, and what does he do? He does the most Moria thing possible. He digs them up, gives them all shadows, and has them build him a floating zombie island. And the crazy thing is, it kind of would explain a lot. Really think about it. Moria was in Ringo, we do know that because that's where he found Ryuma's body and Shusui, right? And who else could be in Ringo? A lot of other frozen corpses. That's quite literally part of Ringo's lore, that it's this eternal graveyard where corpses don't decompose. And that of course lines up perfectly with the idea that Ors and maybe all the other ancient Galela shipwrights ended up frozen in this part of Wano. Whether at the point they were frozen it was already part of Wano or not, who knows. So maybe Moria goes to Ringo after losing to Kaido, digs up Ryuma, stumbles across Ors and maybe the other frozen giants, and we do know that Ors was found in a land of ice, so maybe Moria found them in Ringo and thought, hey, why not raise some of the strongest builders in history while I'm at it? Like already getting really hyped up for his revenge plan, give them some shadows and take them to the remains of God Valley and have them turn part of the island into Thriller Bark. And if those giants really were responsible for building massive ships, it could explain even more, like Pluton. I mean, we do know that Pluton is in Wano too, and it's described as this big, powerful ancient weapon battleship. Well, who better to build a giant battleship than actual giants? And we were introduced to Ors in the arc directly after Pluton was a major plot point in Water 7 as well, so I'm just saying, it kind of seems to really all be coming together at this point. And I mean, yeah, we are connecting a few dots here that might or might not be meant to be connected, but it doesn't really feel like that much of a stretch, right? Thriller Bark and Pluton are both massive ship-like constructions with ancient ties. They're both connected to Wano, and I mean, again, going to the arc before, Iceberg, who named his company Galela and clearly knows about these ancient shipwrights, wants to turn Water 7 into a floating ship-like island, and that's exactly what Thriller Bark, the next arc that we go to, is quite literally. Now, look, okay, there's two holes in the theory that I want to call out for a moment. First, you might be thinking that all these Galala giants were frozen on Punk Hazard, but they were 100% moved there after being frozen, because we do know that Punk Hazard was a tropical place. There was literally no snow whatsoever, so there's just no way that the giants froze right there. Two, they are wearing prisoners' clothes, so they must have been taken there at some point, just like Moria took Ors. The second hole to this theory is a little bit harder because I can't really disprove it, because if Moria had access to all of these ancient giants, why didn't he keep them around? Why just Ors, right? My best guesses would be either sunlight, because we do know that sunlight can kill Moria zombies, so if all the ancient giant builders couldn't get back in the shade, they could have just died that way. I mean, it's not like the ship was built in a floating triangle with all the fog around, because we do know that it does originate from the West Blue. Or maybe the bodies just fell apart after centuries spent frozen solid, or again, maybe it wasn't Moria who turned Thriller Bark into a ship and he just kind of took it over from someone else. Or maybe Moria had all the giants originally, already had Thriller Bark, then lost to Kaido, and then Kaido took all of his big giants away, sent them off to Caesar on Punk Hazard, but Moria only got to keep one of them. To be fair, we don't actually know how long ago all these giants were frozen, and even Ors needed some patching up from Moria's crazy zombie doctor, so without the doctor to help fix their bodies, maybe the giants just couldn't keep going. Either way though, it does give us a pretty solid reason for how this massive floating base came to be with the giant shipbuilders. Alright, but now comes the fun part, because now I'm gonna draw a line straight from Moria to the secret ruler of the world, Imu, because once you start lining up the details, there are some weird, almost creepy similarities between Moria and Imu and their abyss, like way more than you'd actually expect. You'll see what I mean. Let's just start with Moria's powers here, right? So we kind of brushed past this earlier, but Moria's whole ability is about taking control of people. He steals their shadows and then uses them to reanimate some corpses, forcing them to move, fight, and speak under his command. It is quite literally shadow possession. Control, bending someone's will to your own. And when you stack that next to what we've seen from Imu and Elbaf with the entire Domi Reversi, it does start to feel like Moria was just like Oda's test version of Imu's powers down the road, like a big pool of foreshadowing. But that's far from the only connection. Let's get really chilly here and talk about old giant mysterious freezers. Both Moria and Imu have this weird connection to giant freezers in their lair. Moria kept bodies preserved in frozen rooms so that he could use them later, including of course the special one for Ors, and who is literally the only other person in the entire story we've quite literally seen with anything remotely similar? Imu, with this dang giant ice capsule that we still have zero explanation for, by the way, and then we have only seen a giant straw hat in there. Like, what the heck? Also, the straw hat kind of seems to fit Ors's size for no reason. I don't know if that's related, but it's kind of weird also. And I've always wondered if Imu was keeping bodies in there as well, like frozen legendary warriors from the past that he can then bring back to life whenever he wants. But here's something else. Moria was only 12 years old when God Valley was wiped out, so unless he was born there, we kind of have to ask, how does Moria even know about God Valley and who died there? Like, it was supposedly wiped off the map and the history books, right? Erased completely, so how did Moria find it and know about it? Was he the one who moved it after the world government was finished with it? I mean, shouldn't have known about God Valley at all unless someone told him about it, right? So maybe he met someone who knew about God Valley's secrets and that led him to the island so that he could start building his zombie army. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like there must be some connection here between Moria and the forbidden knowledge that I'm just dying to know more about. But whatever the case may be, Moria's role in the story doesn't feel random at all anymore whatsoever. He might have been the big test run for everything we are about to face in Elbaf, and it all once again ties back to my boy Rox, his crew, and their future in the story. Which of course brings us here, the biggest question of all, and one of the main reasons I really wanted to make this video in the first place and was so excited, because everything about Thriller Bark and the God Valley stuff points towards one big conclusion for me. Rox Xebec probably is still alive. And if that's even remotely true, then he's gonna be someone who plays a massive role in the final war, no questions asked. I mean, we have seen so many members of the Rox crew be such big parts of the story. Like, Big Mom had her own arc, Kaido had his own arc, Whitebeard had the entire war, even Rox himself has finally made his appearance in the Elbaf flashback. But what if Rox is not stuck in the flashback zone forever. By the way, the worst place you can be in One Piece, if you know what I'm talking about. But really think about it. If Moria managed to get all of these corpses from God Valley, then what in the world happened to Roxas' body? Why don't we see him amongst the zombies during the arc? As we just spent a lot of time on, Moria went through all this effort to build an undead army using the most powerful pirates in history from that island, and then just skipped the legend himself? I don't know, to me it does not add up. So there's really two options I want to discuss here. The first one being that someone stole Roxas' body first. Could be an explanation. Seriously, the world government could have taken his body, Imu might have frozen him and kept him in his freezer, away from Thriller Bark, and honestly, the idea that Roxas is just chilling on ice somewhere, waiting to be revived, is kind of terrifying, but also very possible, especially if we remember this panel here from Impel Down, where we see someone who does look a lot like Rox, and who has this guy who talks about him has the exact same vibe as chapter 1154, so could be that. But the other possibility, and the one I really like to think is more likely, is that Rox just straight up isn't dead at all. And if he's not dead, that really changes everything about the story. For one, it would straight up explain how Blackbeard knows so much about the Darkness Fruit and his entire plan, like why he's so obsessed with Rox's legacy, I should say his father's legacy, which we now know. Maybe Rox didn't just inspire him, maybe he's also been mentoring his son. So maybe dear old daddy has been feeding him knowledge from the shadows. Literally, like a Madara type situation, because if anyone's gonna pass down ancient secrets about darkness and world domination, well, it would be the guy who once tried to take on the Celestial Dragons, the Marines, and the Roger Pirates all at the same time. About freaking confidence, bro. Or if we want to stick with shadow powers, did you notice how Blackbeard and Rox are basically almost clones of each other? I do know Blackbeard is his son, but what if there's more than just that? I mean, you do remember the famous "it's not him, it's them" line from Jaya that we get from, you know, Luffy and Zoro. So what if somehow Rox's shadow got put into Blackbeard's body? I do know Moria would have been really young, but maybe he already had his shadow powers then. And it would technically be possible with Blackbeard's age as well, since Teach was 2 years old at the time, and that would explain how Blackbeard could be multiple people and have knowledge that he otherwise shouldn't have, and the fact that he apparently doesn't sleep. Because when I think about it, I don't think we ever were told that Moria can only put shadows into dead or, you know, like saw together bodies. That's just what he does. It doesn't really state that he can't take a shadow and put it into a living thing. And that scenario would be especially concerning now that Blackbeard knows the locations of both Pluton and Poseidon, two of the ancient weapons. And if we're really unlucky, then he also already knows the secret of how Pluton was built and how to operate it, especially following Oda's big reveal of the ancient giants Galala Company, probably dating back all the way to the Void Century, which by the way happened again in the very same chapter as the big Rox reveal. And if you want to find out too and how this all might tie even more to Thriller Bark, you can watch this video here next. Otherwise though, Shanks as always so much for watching. You guys are amazing. An extra special Shanks to all of the fantastic Patreon supporters we already have. You guys really rock and you make this channel possible. Thanks again, and I will see you on the weekend for another crazy video. All right.